Middle-earth holds more than mountains and rivers. It carries the echoes of forgotten ages. I am your keeper of ancient knowledge, sharing the deeper lore that illuminates even the darkest mysteries. Welcome to the Untold Stories.
The Dwarf Lord who betrayed Erebor to Smaug, a tale of the elder days. Section 1. Shadowed Beginnings. In the days when the lonely mountain stood proud beneath the stars, when the forges of Erebor rang with the music of hammers upon anvils, and when the river running bore the laughter of Dale's children to the long lake, there dwelt among the dwarves a lord whose name has since been struck from the books of Mazarbul and spoken only in whispers of warning. Borin, the Black-Hearted, he was called in later years, though in those bright days he was known as Borin the Goldwright, master of the deepest halls beneath the mountain. His halls delved deeper than any save the king's own, and in those shadowed depths he wrought treasures that caught the light of the Arkenstone itself and threw it back threefold. The golden cups from his forges graced the tables of kings beyond the misty mountains, and his silver mail was sought by warriors from the grey havens to the Sea of Rune. Yet for all his skill, for all the wealth that flowed like rivers of starlight through his treasure vaults, Borin's heart harboured a canker that no flame could burn away, no hammer could beat into true shape. He loved gold as a dragon loves gold, not for its beauty, not for the craft that shaped it, but for the having of it, the hoarding of it, the counting of it in the long watches of the night. The first shadow fell upon Erebor, not with the beating of wings or the roaring of flame, but with the soft whisper of covetousness in a dwarf lord's heart. For in those days, word came to the mountain of a great hoard hidden in the grey mountains, in the abandoned halls of Dain the Elder's folk, the hoard of the dragon kings of old, it was whispered, greater than any treasure that had gleamed beneath the stars since the making of the Silmarils. King Thror heard these whispers and smiled, for he knew the tales of old were often greater in the telling than in the truth. But Borin heard them with different ears, and in the depths of his black halls he began to count his own treasures and find them wanting. Night after night he walked among his hoards, and each golden cup seemed less bright, each silver chain less fine, each jeweled blade less worthy than that distant, imagined wealth that lay sleeping in the northern heights. The autumn wind blew cold through the valley of Dale, and the leaves fell like beaten copper coins upon the waters of the long lake. In the halls of Erebor, the forges burned bright, but in the deepest hall of all, Borin the Goldwright sat in darkness, and for the first time in his long life, he found no joy in the gleam of treasure. Instead, he felt only the gnawing hunger for that which he did not possess, and in that hunger, a seed of treachery began to take root. Far to the north, beyond the grey mountains, beyond the knowledge of even the far-wandering ravens of Erebor, something else stirred. In the desolation of withered heath, where no grass grew and no water ran clean, an eye opened that had been closed for generations of men. Smaug the mighty, Smaug the impenetrable, Smaug the unassailable, last of the great fire drakes of the north, lifted his head from his long sleep and scented gold upon the wind. The shadow had begun to fall, though none yet knew it, and the first thread in the web of betrayal had been spun in the dark heart of a dwarf who loved gold more than honor, more than kinship, more than life itself. Section 2. a whisper in the trees. The old forest road wound eastward from the high pass like a silver thread through the dark tapestry of Mirkwood, though in those days it was called Greenwood the Great, and its shadows were not yet poisoned with the malice that would later darken its paths. Along this road there came walking a figure that the wood elves marked with curious eyes, a dwarf travelling alone, which was a thing seldom seen since the days of Durin's founding. Borin the Goldwright walked with steady purpose, his iron-shod boots ringing upon the ancient stones, but his eyes were turned inward upon visions of treasure. He had told King Thror that he would seek trade friendship with the woodland realm, carrying gifts of worked gold and offers of alliance, noble words and true enough in their fashion, though the truth that lay beneath them was darker than the shadows between the great trees. 3 days into the wood, when the light grew green and strange, and the path seemed to twist back upon itself like a serpent chasing its own tail, Borin paused beside a stream that laughed and danced over stones worn smooth by countless years. Here he unpacked his provisions and made camp, though the sun stood yet high above the canopy. For he had come to this place not to rest, but to meet one whose footsteps had been walking parallel to his own since he entered the forest. "Come forth," he called to the watching shadows. "I know you are there, son of the woodland. I mean no trespass in your halls of living green." From among the malorn trees stepped an elf lord, tall and fair as were all the firstborn. His grey cloak shot through with silver threads that caught the dappled sunlight. Upon his brow was a circlet of mithril, and at his side hung a sword whose blade had been forged in Gondolin before its fall. This was Orifer, who would one day be king in those woods, though now he served as herald and guardian to King Thranduil. "Well met, Dwarf of the Mountain," said Orifer, and his voice carried the music of wind through leaves and water over stone. "Your coming was seen in the watching crystals before ever you set foot upon the road. Tell me now, what brings one of Durin's folk to walk alone in Greenwood? For it is long since dwarf and elf shared bread and water in friendship." Borin bowed low as courtesy demanded, though his heart burned with impatience. "I seek audience with your king, Lord Orifer, for there are matters of trade and alliance that would profit both our peoples. The forges of Erebor burn bright, and our skill in working gold and mithril grows with each passing year. Perhaps the woodland realm has need of such craft." "Perhaps," said Orifer, though his keen eyes seemed to look through Borin's words to the thoughts that lay beneath. "Yet I sense that your true errand runs deeper than trade talk and exchange of gifts. There is shadow in your mind, Goldwright, and a hunger that sits ill upon one of Aula's children." The words struck Borin like hammer blows, for the elves had ever the gift of seeing beyond the surface of things into the truth that dwelt beneath. For a moment, his composure cracked, and something of his true purpose showed in his eyes like flame glimpsed through a gap in the forged doors. "I seek knowledge," he said at last, his voice carefully controlled. "In the halls of memory that your people keep, there may be wisdom of the elder days that could profit the kingdom under the mountain. Tales of the dragon hordes of old, perhaps, or maps that show the paths to forgotten treasure houses in the grey mountains." Now it was Orifer's turn to be silent, for he saw clearly the path that Borin's thoughts were taking, and it seemed to him like a road that led down into darkness. The hunger for gold had had ever been the failing of the dwarves, as pride was the failing of the Noldor, and he had seen where such hungers led when they were not mastered. "Come then to the halls of the Woodland King," he said at last. "But know this, Borin Goldright, the knowledge you seek may not bring you the joy you imagine, for all roads that lead to Dragon Gold are written in fire and death, and none who walk them return unchanged. Together they walk deeper into the green twilight of the forest, while overhead the leaves whispered warnings that neither of them truly heeded, and far away in Erebor, the first small crack appeared in the foundations of the kingdom under the mountain." Section 3. The Lone Rider. 7 leagues north of the borders of the woodland realm, where the old forest road dwindled to little more than a deer track through the bracken, there rode a figure cloaked in grey, whose horse needed no guidance through the pathless wild. This was Gandalf the Grey in the days of his wandering, though he bore then other names in other tongues: Mithrandir among the elves, Tharkun in the speech of the dwarves, Incarnus in the far south, where few remembered the old stories. His staff was tipped with crystal that caught and held the starlight, and his hat was wide-brimmed against both sun and rain. Shadowfax he did not yet ride. That lord of horses was still wild upon the plains of Rohan, but the horse beneath him was of good mountain stock, sure-footed and wise, with eyes that seemed to hold understanding of roads that led beyond the circles of the world. The wizard rode in troubled thought, for there had come to him rumours and whispers from many quarters that spoke of growing shadow in the north. The ravens that were his messengers brought word of restlessness among the dragons of the grey mountains, and the eagles of the misty mountains spoke of a great stirring in the withered heath, where nothing good had walked since the elder days. Moreover, his own dreams had been dark of late, filled with fire and the sound of beating wings. 3 nights past, he had ridden through Dale in the guise of a simple wanderer seeking shelter, and had marked how the men spoke in hushed voices of strange lights seen dancing above the peaks of Erebor, and of deep rumblings that came up from the roots of the mountain. The guards upon the walls had reported shapes moving in the high places, too large to be eagles, too purposeful to be clouds, but most troubling of all had been his brief encounter with Borin the Goldright upon the road to the woodland realm. The dwarf had been courteous enough in his greeting, as was proper between travellers in the wild, yet there had been something in his manner that set the wizard's teeth on edge, a furtiveness, a hunger poorly concealed, that spoke of purposes darker than simple trade dealing. Now Gandalf rode northward through the gathering dusk, following paths that only he knew, paths that led through hidden valleys and secret ways toward the grey mountains and the ancient places where dragons had led in the days of their strength. His errand was simple in its statement, though perilous beyond measure in its execution: to learn whether the stirrings his spies reported were merely the restless dreams of sleeping worms, or the first signs of a waking that would bring fire and ruin to all the north. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient courses, and the wind brought scents of pine and snow from the high places. In a grove of silver birch beside a stream that sang softly of distant springs, Gandalf made his camp and lit a small fire that burned with flames of blue and silver. From his pack he took bread and dried fruit, simple fare for a simple meal, though the water in his flask had been drawn from the fountain of Nimrodel and retained something of the light that had shone in Lothlorien since the world was young. As he ate, he pondered the signs and portents that had brought him to this wild place. The Valar moved in ways beyond the understanding of even the wise, yet patterns could sometimes be discerned by those who knew how to look. The growing darkness in Dol Guldur, which he had long suspected but not yet proven, the restlessness of the dragons, the strange hungers that seemed to be stirring in the hearts of both high and low. All these spoke of a time of testing that drew near. From his robes, he drew forth a crystal globe, no larger than his fist, clear as water, yet shot through with veins of silver fire. This was one of the Palantiri of old, though smaller than the great seeing stones that had been made for the kings of Númenor. Through it, he could speak across vast distances with others of the White Council, though such communication was not without its perils. The globe grew warm in his hands and began to glow with inner light. Within its depths, shadows moved and formed into the semblance of a face, noble and fair, yet marked with the weight of years beyond counting. This was Elrond of Rivendell, keeper of Vilya the Blue, wisest of all the Eldar who remained in Middle-earth. Mithrandir, came the voice from the stone, clear as bell song across water. I have felt your seeking across the leagues. What news from your wandering? Dark news, I fear, Gandalf replied, his voice low, lest it carry to unwelcome ears. The dragons stir, and I ride now to learn the depth of their waking. But there is something more, a shadow that moves among the dwarves of Erebor, a corruption that may serve purposes darker than simple greed. In the crystal, Elrond's face grew grave. Then the time of choosing draws near, as was foretold in the songs of old. Watch well, Gandalf the Grey, for the fate of more than the kingdom under the mountain may hang upon what you discover in the days to come. The light in the Palantir faded, and the grove was dark once more, save for the silver flames of the wizard's fire. Overhead, a great eagle circled 3 times in salute before disappearing into the star-filled darkness, and Gandalf knew that his message had been carried to the heights where the Windlords kept their vigil. Tomorrow would bring new roads and new perils, but tonight he sat in the silence of the wild places and felt the great wheel of the world turning beneath the weight of coming change. Section 4. Dol Guldur, in the distance. The dawn came grey and cold to the peaks of the grey mountains, and with it came the first whisper of wings upon the wind, great wings that had not stirred for 300 years, in the deepest caves of the withered heath, where the bones of ancient battles lay white as salt beneath the endless grey sky. Smaug the mighty lifted his head and tasted the air with forked tongue. Gold. The scent came to him clear as sunrise, rich and heavy with the promise of wealth beyond the dreams of lesser beings. Not the thin scattered gold of mortal hoards, but the deep, concentrated gold of a great treasure house, where the wealth of ages had been gathered by hands that knew the true worth of what they wrought. And beneath that golden scent, another smell that made his eyes narrow to burning slits, the smell of dwarf work, of mithril and iron beaten upon anvils in the deep places of the earth. Erebor. The name came to him as a whisper of memory from the days before his sleep, when he had been young among dragonkind, and the great hordes of the north had still been scattered among many lairs. The lonely mountain, where the dwarves of Durin's line had delved deep and built halls that rivaled even Khazad-dûm in their splendor. In those days, he had been too small to challenge the kingdom under the mountain, but now he was grown to his full, terrible strength, and the scent of gold called to him like a trumpet call to war. But dragons, for all their greed and fire, are not creatures of blind impulse. Smaug had lived long enough to know that the greatest treasures were often the most perilously guarded, and though his pride was vast as his greed, he had not survived the wrath of kings and armies by rushing unthinking into battle. No, he would watch and wait and learn what he could of the defenses of Erebor before he spread his wings and flew to claim what his heart desired. From his lair in the grey stone, he sent forth his will like a searching wind, calling to all the creatures of shadow and malice that dwelt in the wildlands between the mountains and the wood. Wargs came slinking from their dens, their eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. Orcs crept forth from caves and crevices, bearing rusty weapons and nursing old grudges against the world of light. Even the great spiders that had begun to creep into the southern reaches of Mirkwood felt his call and turned their many eyes northward. To all these he spoke without words, commanding them to watch and listen and report what they learned of the comings and goings from the lonely mountain. How many warriors dwelt there? How well were the gates warded? What allies might come to the dwarves' aid in the hour of need? All this he would know before he struck, for though his wrath would be terrible when it came, his cunning was greater still. Meanwhile, in the hidden fastness of Dol Guldur, which men called the Hill of Sorcery, another will stirred to wakefulness. Here, in the ruins of an ancient fortress that had once stood guard against the darkness of the old world, something that was neither living nor dead had taken up its dwelling. The necromancer, men whispered in the villages of the woodsmen, though none dared speak that name above a whisper. Here was shadow without form, malice without body, hatred given will and purpose. This was Sauron, though few yet knew that name or remembered the terror it had once wrought in the world. In the days of his power, he had been the greatest of servants to Morgoth the Black, and when his master fell, he had fled into the waste places to nurse his wounds and plan his return. Now, after long ages of hiding and slow recovery, he had grown strong enough to take action once more, though still he dared not reveal his true name or nature. From the high tower of Dol Guldur, he watched the stirring of the dragon with interest that was more than casual. Smaug was mighty, and in his greed and wrath might serve purposes beyond his own. If the great worm could be guided, not commanded, for dragons bow to no will save their own, but guided by subtle means, he might become an instrument of much greater destruction than he knew. The fall of Erebor would be only the beginning, for the lonely mountain commanded the roads between the woodland realm and the dwellings of men. With it in ruins, the north would lie open to the shadow. But first, there must be a way opened for the dragon to strike. Erebor was strong, its gates mighty, its warriors brave and skilled. Even Smaug might find the conquest more difficult than he expected if he came upon the mountain while its defenses were at full strength. No, what was needed was treachery from within, a hand to open the gate, a voice to whisper poison in the right ears at the right time. And in the Palantir of Dol Guldur, the necromancer had seen just such a hand, just such a voice, a dwarf lord whose heart was already turned to darkness by his greed. who walked even now the paths that led to betrayal. Borin the Goldwright knew it not, but his footsteps were already set upon the road that would lead to the destruction of all he claimed to love. In the grey mountains, Smaug spread his wings and felt the wind beneath them. Soon, he promised himself, soon he would fly south and claim the hoard that was rightfully his. But patience, always patience. The gold had waited long centuries for him. It could wait a little longer. Section 5. Into the black, the halls of the Woodland King lay deep beneath the great hill that rose like a green crown above the waters of the forest river, and thither came Borin the Goldwright, with gifts of gold and silver, and words of friendship upon his lips. Yet his true purpose lay heavier on his heart than any treasure in his pack. And when at last he stood before the carved doors of Thranduil's throne room, it was with the step of one who walks willingly into shadow. The Elven King sat upon a throne carved from the living wood of a great tree, and his crown was wrought of silver set with white gems that held the light of stars. Fair was he to look upon, as are all the firstborn, yet there was in his eyes the weight of long years and the memory of sorrows that would have crushed the heart of mortal men. At his right hand stood Orifer, his herald, and at his left hand was placed a chair of carved oak inlaid with mithril, a seat of honor for the dwarf lord who came seeking friendship. "Welcome, Borin, son of Fundin," spoke Thranduil, and his voice was like the whisper of wind through leaves in the deep forest. "Long has it been since one of Durin's house walked these halls in peace. What brings you so far from the forges of Erebor to seek speech with the people of the wood?" Borin made deep reverence before the throne, as was proper between kings and lords. Yet when he lifted his head, those who watched marked how his eyes went first, not to the king's face, but to the silver circlet upon his brow, and to the white gems that glittered there like fallen stars. "Great king," he said, and his words were courteous, though his heart burned with avarice. "I come from Thror King under the mountain, with gifts and greetings, and with hope that the old friendship between our peoples might be renewed. The forges of Erebor burn bright in these days, and our craft in working gold and mithril has grown beyond what it was in the days of our fathers. Perhaps there is work that we might do together for the profit of both our realms." "Perhaps indeed," said Thranduil, though his keen sight had not missed the hunger that flickered in the dwarf's eyes. "Yet I think your errand runs deeper than simple trade dealing. Speak plainly, Goldwright, for the Eldar are not easily deceived by fair words that hide darker purposes." At these words, Borin felt the weight of many eyes upon him, and for a moment his carefully prepared speeches fled from his mind like deer before the wolf. In that moment of silence, the truth of his purpose stood naked before the throne, and he knew that concealment was no longer possible. "I seek knowledge, Lord," he said at last, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In the days of your long memory, you have heard tell of the dragon hoards that lie hidden in the grey mountains, the treasure houses of the dragon kings of old. I would learn their whereabouts, that the wealth of my people might be increased." A silence fell upon the hall, like the hush before thunder, and when Thranduil spoke again, his voice carried the chill of winter frost. "Now at last I see the shadow that has followed you into my halls, dwarf of the mountain. You seek knowledge of dragon gold, and I say to you that such knowledge is a burden that none should willingly take upon themselves. For all roads that lead to dragon hordes are written in fire and death, and none who walk them return unchanged. Yet the knowledge exists, pressed Borin, his greed overmastering his wisdom. In the halls of memory that your people keep, surely there are maps and tales that speak of these hordes. I ask not for gift but for trade. Name your price, and if it is within my power to pay, I shall meet it gladly. Oriphus stepped forward then, his hand upon his sword hilt, for he had seen the darkness growing in the dwarf's heart and feared what it might lead to. But Thranduil raised a hand to stay him, and his face grew sad, as one who looks upon a friend walking willingly toward his doom. There is indeed such knowledge in our keeping, he said slowly. Maps drawn in the elder days when the dragons were young and their lairs were known to the wise. But I tell you now, Borin Goldright, that this knowledge is not for sale, nor for trade, nor for the asking of any who come with greed in their hearts. For I have seen in the mirror of Galadriel what may come to pass if such knowledge is given to those who would use it ill, and it is fire and ruin and the fall of kingdoms. But Borin's heart was already too far turned to darkness to heed such warnings, and he pressed his suit with words that grew ever more desperate and eager. Through the long watches of the night, he pleaded and bargained, offering treasures beyond price for even the smallest hint of where the dragon gold might lie. And though Thranduil remained steadfast in his refusal, there were others in the hall who listened to the dwarves' words with different ears. For among the elves who served in the king's household was one named Galion, keeper of the royal cellars, whose heart had been touched by the slow corruption that had begun to creep into Mirkwood from the south. In him, the dwarf's gold hunger found an echo, and before the night was through, a bargain had been struck in whispered words and shadowed corners, a bargain that would open the first door upon the path to Erebor's fall. Section 6. The Captive King. In the deepest dungeons beneath the woodland king's halls, where roots of great trees wound through the living rock, and no light came save from phosphorescent fungi that gleamed like ghostly stars, there dwelt a prisoner whose name had once been spoken with terror from the grey havens to the Sea of Rune. Azog the Defiler, last of the great Orc chieftains of the Misty Mountains, sat in chains of mithril that had been forged in Erebor's furnaces and blessed by the elves with such power that even his vast strength could not break them. Long years had he languished in that place, taken alive in the battle of Azanul-Bizar when all his host was broken and scattered to the winds. Death would have been a kindness to such as he. Yet Thranduil had stayed the executioner's blade, for in the dark heart of the Orc captain lay knowledge that might one day prove needful, knowledge of the Shadow's plans and purposes, of the movements in the dark places of the world. To this dungeon came Borin in the grey hour before dawn, when the guards drowsed at their posts, and even the keen ears of the elves were turned to other matters. Galion the Cellarer walked before him, carrying keys of silver and speaking in whispers that barely stirred the heavy air. "You are certain this creature has the knowledge I seek?" asked Borin, his voice tight with mingled fear and anticipation. For though his heart was turned to darkness, he was still a dwarf of Erebor, and the hereditary hatred between his people and the Orcs ran deeper than the roots of mountains. "Certain as death," replied Galion, his own voice poisoned with the greed that had bought his betrayal. Azog commanded the northern passes for 2 centuries before his fall. If any living creature knows the paths to the dragon lairs of old, it is he. But remember our bargain, Dwarf, the location of King Thranduil's private hoard, where he keeps the gems that came out of Doriath before its fall, and the silver crown that was worn by Elwy Thingol himself. You shall have it, promised Borin, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. For he knew that what he contemplated was not mere theft, but sacrilege, the violation of treasures that belonged not to any single being, but to the memory of the elder days themselves. The door of the dungeon swung open with a groan of ancient hinges, and there, in the phosphorescent gloom, sat the orc captain, his massive form hunched over chains that gleamed like liquid starlight. At the sound of footsteps, he lifted his head, and his red eyes fixed upon Borin with a malice that made the dwarf's blood run cold. So, rumbled Azog in the black speech, his voice like the grinding of millstones, the little dwarf comes seeking audience with Azog the mighty. What brings one of the beard folk to the realm of shadow and chains? Galen whispered a word in the dwarf's ear, and Borin stepped forward, fighting down the urge to draw the axe that hung at his belt. I seek knowledge, Orc, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. Knowledge that you possess, and which I am willing to purchase at a price you name. The great head tilted, and something like amusement flickered in those burning eyes. Knowledge, is it? And what knowledge could the proud dwarves of Erebor seek from one they have chained in darkness? Speak plainly, little dwarf, for Azog has little patience for riddling words. The dragon hordes of the grey mountains, said Borin, the words torn from his throat like blood from a wound. I would know their whereabouts, their guardians, the paths that lead to them. For a long moment, silence reigned in the dungeon, save for the slow dripping of water from the stone ceiling. Then Azog threw back his head and laughed, a sound like the howling of wolves in winter that echoed through the corridors and made the guards stir uneasily at their posts. Dragon gold, he roared when his mirth had spent itself. The little dwarf seeks dragon gold and comes to Azog for guidance. Oh, this is rich beyond the dreams of avarice. Tell me, beard child, what will you give for such knowledge? What price will you pay for the maps that lead to fire and death? Name your price, said Borin, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. The red eyes narrowed to burning slits, and when Azog spoke again, his voice was soft as a serpent's whisper. Freedom, he said. Break these chains, open the doors of this prison, and give me back my sword and armor. Do this, and I will give you not only the knowledge you seek, but something more precious still, a way to claim the greatest dragon horde of all without facing the dragon's wrath. That is impossible, began Borin. But Azog cut him off with a gesture of one massive hand. Nothing is impossible to those with the will to seize what they desire, said the orc. I know secrets, little dwarf, secrets of the shadow that stirs in Dol Guldur, secrets of powers that wake in the darkness. The dragon Smaug prepares even now to fly south, drawn by the scent of gold from Erebor. But dragons are proud creatures, slow to trust and quick to wrath. He could be guided, shall we say, to strike when the mountain's defenses are weakest. The words hit Borin like hammer blows, and for a moment the full enormity of what the orc was suggesting staggered him. Yet even as horror warred with greed in his heart, he found himself leaning forward, drawn by the promise of wealth beyond all dreaming. "You speak of treachery," he whispered. "I speak of opportunity," Azog replied, his smile revealing teeth like yellow daggers. "The choice is yours, Goldright. Walk away now and remain a minor lord in a kingdom that may not survive the coming storm, or take what I offer and become the richest being in all Middle-earth when the fires have cooled and the treasure chambers of Erebor lie open to your hand." In the silence that followed, Borin felt the last restraints of honor and loyalty crumble to dust in his heart, consumed by the fires of avarice that Azog's words had fanned to white heat. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer that of a lord of Erebor, but of something far darker and more terrible. "Tell me more of this plan," he said, and with those words, the doom of the kingdom under the mountain was sealed. Section 7. The Necromancer's Voice. High in the tower of Dol Guldur, where the stones themselves wept with accumulated malice, and the very air shimmered with unveiled power, the necromancer sat in contemplation of webs within webs, plans within plans that stretched across the years, like shadows cast by a dying sun. Before him lay the Palantir of Dol Guldur, greatest of the Seeing Stones, save only the Master Stone of Osgiliath, and in its depths moved visions that would have blasted the mind of any lesser being. He saw the dragons stirring in the grey mountains, felt the slow pulse of ancient greed awakening to new purpose. He saw the Dwarf Lord treading the paths of betrayal in the halls of the Woodland King. His heart already half turned to shadow. He saw the Orc captain in his chains, spinning webs of corruption with words deadlier than any blade. All these were threads in the great tapestry he wove, instruments to serve a purpose greater than any of them could comprehend. For this was Sauron, though that name he had not yet dared to speak aloud in the world. In the days of his power, when he wore fair form and spoke with honeyed words, he had been the greatest servant of Morgoth the Black, mightiest of the Ainur who had fallen into darkness. When his master was cast into the void and the first age ended in flame and ruin, he had fled to the waste places to nurse his wounds and plot his return to power. Long had he dwelt in the shadows, building his strength in secret, gathering to himself all the creatures of malice that crept and crawled in the dark corners of the world. The 9 he had bound to his will with rings of power, making them his most terrible servants. Orcs he had bred and trained in the caverns of the misty mountains, and wolves and wargs and great spiders answered to his call. Yet still, he was not strong enough to challenge the free peoples openly, not while the elves held the Che, 3 and the Dunedain kept watch in the north. But subtlety might accomplish what force could not, and in the greed of the Dwarf Lord, he saw an opportunity that might serve all his purposes at once. The fall of Erebor would remove a powerful ally from the free peoples, scatter the gold-hungry dwarves to the winds, and leave the north open to his creatures. More than that, it would sow discord between the elves and men, for they would surely blame each other for failing to come to the mountain's aid in time. From the shadows of the tower, he sent forth his will like a searching wind, seeking the mind of Azog where he sat in chains beneath the Woodland King's halls. The Orc captain was a crude instrument, driven by hatred and the lust for revenge, but he had served the shadow faithfully in years past and might be trusted to do so again, especially if he could be convinced that his own purposes would be served thereby. Azog, he whispered, in the speech that had no words, the dark tongue that spoke directly to the spirit. My faithful captain, do you remember your master's voice? In the dungeon far to the south, the great orc lifted his head as though he heard thunder rolling across distant hills. His red eyes gleamed with sudden recognition, and his mouth twisted in what might have been a smile or a snarl. Master, he replied in the same soundless speech, long have I awaited your call. The chains of the tree folk hold my body fast, but my spirit remains yours to command. Then hear me well, came the necromancer's reply. The hour approaches when your chains may be broken and your enemies given into your hand for vengeance. A dwarf comes to you seeking knowledge of dragon gold. This you have already seen. Give him what he asks, but make sure he pays the price I name. For there is a work to be done that requires treachery from within as well as assault from without. In the visions that flowed between them, Sauron showed his servant the shape of the plan that was forming in his mind. The dragon would be guided to Erebor, yes, but not yet. First, the mountain's defenses must be weakened from within. The dwarf lord's greed would be the key, turned and twisted until it became the blade that cut the kingdom's throat. And when the dragon struck at last, there would be none left with strength to resist. It shall be as you command, Azog replied, his mental voice thick with anticipated pleasure. The dwarf's heart is already more than half turned to shadow. It will not take much to push him over the edge into full betrayal. And when Erebor falls, the Tree King's subjects will learn what it means to chain Azog the Defiler. Patience, the necromancer counseled, though he approved of his servant's eagerness. All things in their proper time and season. First, let the dwarf complete his part in the work, then shall your hour of freedom come. But remember, when the time comes to strike, show no mercy to any who dwell beneath the mountain. Let none escape to carry word of what has transpired, lest the wise ones divine too quickly the hand that guided events. The connection between them faded like smoke on the wind, leaving Azog alone with his chains and his burning anticipation of revenge. In the tower of Dol Guldur, the necromancer turned his gaze to other matters, other threads in the web that must be carefully tended. Soon, very soon now, the first great blow would be struck against the free peoples of Middle-earth, and the world would begin its slow slide into the darkness that he had prepared for it. Far away, in the halls of the Woodland King, Borin the Goldwright made his fateful choice and set foot upon the road that would lead to the ruin of all he had once held dear. The shadow was spreading, and even the wisest of the wise had not yet perceived the full shape of the doom that gathered like storm clouds above the lonely mountain. Section 8. Fire in the darkness. The night that followed was dark with more than the absence of sun, for clouds had gathered thick as wool above the halls of the Woodland King, and within those halls, treachery walked on silent feet through corridors where once only honor had dwelt. In the deepest cellars, where the king's most precious wines aged in barrels of heartwood from Lothlorien, Galeon the traitor went about his work with trembling hands and a heart that hammered like a smith's anvil against his ribs. The keys of silver sang softly as they turned in locks that had been crafted by elven smiths in the elder days, and one by one the doors swung open that guarded the paths to Thranduil's private treasure chamber. Here, in a vault, carved from the living rock and warded with words of power that made the very air shimmer like water, lay the hoarded wealth of centuries, gems that had caught the light of the two trees before their death, silver that had been mined in the hills of Valinor when the world was young, and gold that held within itself memories of the music that shaped all things. At the heart of this treasure stood a pedestal of white stone, and upon it rested a crown of mithril so fair that it seemed to shine with light of its own making. This was the silver crown of Elwë that had been worn by the Grey King in Doriath before the ruin of Beleriand, and beside it lay maps drawn upon parchment that had been made from the bark of malon trees, maps that showed the paths and passes of the Grey Mountains, as they had been in the days when dragons were young and their hoards were known to the wise. Borin stood before these treasures with wonder and horror warring in his heart, for even in his fall he was still dwarf enough to recognize the craftsmanship that had gone into their making. These were not mere objects of value, but repositories of history, vessels that held within themselves the memory of ages that would never come again. To steal them was not merely theft, but a kind of murder, the slaying of something irreplaceable and beautiful. Yet greed had eaten so deeply into his heart that even this knowledge could not stay his hand. With fingers that shook like leaves in winter wind, he lifted the crown from its pedestal and thrust it into the leather sack he had brought for the purpose. The maps followed, and a handful of the most precious gems, their light dying as they were wrapped in common cloth and hidden from the sight of stars. "It is done," he whispered to Galion, and his voice was hoarse as though he had been screaming. "The bargain is fulfilled. Now you must keep your part and see that the way is opened for our escape." But as they turned to leave the violated chamber, a voice spoke from the shadows behind them, a voice like silver bells tolling across water, beautiful and terrible in its quiet certainty. "Hold, thieves and betrayers. Did you think to creep like rats through the halls of the Elven King and leave no trace of your passage?" From the darkness stepped Orifer, herald of the king, and in his hand was drawn the sword Aeglos that had been forged in Gondolin and had drunk the black blood of Balrogs in the wars of the elder days. His grey eyes were bright with wrath, and about him was the light that comes upon the Eldar when their anger is kindled. Galion fell to his knees with a cry of despair, for he knew that discovery meant not merely punishment, but exile from the only home he had ever known. But Borin's hand went to the axe at his belt, and in his eyes was the red gleam of one who has already chosen the path of violence and will not turn back from it. "Stand aside, elf," he snarled, his voice no longer holding even the pretense of courtesy. "I have what I came for, and I will not be denied. The treasure is mine by right of bargain, fairly made." "By right of theft and corruption," Orifer replied, his sword point steady as starlight. "No bargain made in shadow and sealed with treachery has any binding in the halls of the just. Return what you have stolen, dwarf, and perhaps King Thranduil's mercy may yet spare your life." For a moment they faced each other in the narrow confines of the treasure chamber, elf and dwarf, and between them lay all the weight of ancient grievances and fresh betrayal. Then Borin struck, his axe cleaving the air where Orifer's head had been, and the sound of steel on steel rang through the vaults like thunder. Swift as lightning was the herald's blade, and true as starlight its stroke. Yet Borin fought with the desperate strength of one who knows that discovery means death, and his axework was cunning with all the skill of his people. Back and forth they battled among the scattered treasures, their weapons throwing sparks that danced like fireflies in the darkness, while Galen cowered against the wall and wept for the choice that had brought them all to this pass. Yet skill and desperation could not long prevail against the trained might of one of the firstborn, and when Eglos at last found his mark, Borin the Goldwright fell among the treasures he had sought to steal, his life's blood pooling around gems that had been old when the world was young. But even as he died, his hand clutched still the leather sack that held the stolen maps, and with his last breath he spoke words in a tongue that Orifer did not recognize, words that carried beyond the walls of the chamber to ears that waited in the darkness. "It is done," the words said in the black speech. "The way is opened, and the dragon flies at dawn." Too late, too late. The herald understood the true scope of the treachery that had been wrought. This theft had been but a part of some greater plan, a single thread in a web of malice that stretched far beyond the borders of the woodland realm. And even as the knowledge came to him, the sound of great wings beating reached his ears from the night sky above, and he knew that somewhere in the darkness a terror had awakened that would bring fire and ruin to the north. Section 9. Return to the Wise. The house of Elrond lay like a jewel set in green gardens beside the waters of Bruinen, and thither came Gandalf the Grey in the grey hour before dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and foam from hard riding through the night. Behind him, in the misty mountains, the peaks glowed red as blood in the light of fires that burned where no fires should be, and the wind that followed him from the north carried the reek of smoke and the distant sound of lamentation. In the courtyard of the last homely house, stablers took his weary horse and tended to its needs, while the wizard himself strode swiftly through corridors lined with tapestries that told the tales of elder days. His face was grim beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, and his staff struck sparks from the stone floor with each hurried step. He found Elrond in the chamber of the fire, that room where burned the flame that had been kindled from the fires of Arundel's ship when first it sailed the skies. The Lord of Rivendell stood before the hearth with his back turned, gazing into flames that danced with memories of light that had shone ere the sun and moon were made. In his hand was Vilya, mightiest of the three, and its blue radiance mingled with the firelight to cast shifting shadows on the walls. "The dragon flies," said Gandalf without preamble, his voice heavy with grief and foreboding. Smaug the Mighty has awakened from his long sleep and turned his eyes toward Erebor. Even now he wings his way south, and before another day has passed, the lonely mountain will lie in ruin, and Dale will be ash upon the wind. Elrond turned, and on his ageless face was a written sorrow deeper than the foundations of the mountains. "I have seen it," he said quietly. "In the mirror of Galadriel, the vision came to me 3 hours past. The mountain wrapped in flames, the great gates broken, the halls of Durin's folk filled with smoke and shadow. Tell me, Mithrandir, what signs preceded this awakening? For dragons do not stir from their lairs without cause, and Smaug has slept peacefully for 300 years. Treachery, Gandalf replied, his voice bitter as wormwood. Treachery from within, guided by a will that reaches far beyond the grey mountains. I rode north when first I heard rumours of the dragons stirring, thinking to learn whether the danger was real or merely the stuff of fearful dreams. What I found was worse than anything I had dared imagine. He spoke then of his journey to the borders of the withered heath, where he had found the dragon's lair empty save for the lingering reek of sulphur and the great gouges in the rock where claws longer than swords had scraped against stone. He told of the orcs and wargs that gathered in the wilderness, all turned toward the south as though drawn by some common purpose. And finally, he spoke of his meeting with refugees from Dale, who had fled in the night when the dragon's shadow fell across their town. They spoke of betrayal within Erebor itself, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. A dwarf lord named Borin, who had been seduced by promises of wealth beyond measure. He opened a secret way into the mountain, they said, and when Smaug struck, the defenders found their own defences turned against them. Elrond's face grew stern as Winterstone. Borin the Goldright, he said. Yes, I knew him in younger days, when he came to Rivendell bearing gifts from King Thror. Even then, there was shadow in his heart, a hunger that would not be satisfied no matter how much gold passed through his hands. But who could have guided him to such betrayal? Who has the power to turn the heart of a dwarf lord so completely to darkness? I think we both know the answer to that question, Gandalf replied grimly. The same power that has been growing in Dol Guldur these many years, the shadow that calls itself the Necromancer, but whose true nature we have long suspected. This has his hand upon it, Elrond. The fall of Erebor is not merely the work of dragon greed, but the first move in a game whose end we can only guess at. They stood in silence for a long moment, each lost in contemplation of the web of malice that seemed to spread its tendrils throughout the north. At length, Elrond spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of decisions that would shape the fate of ages. The White Council must be summoned, he said. Galadriel and Saruman, Radagast and such others as can be reached in time. If this is indeed the work of the enemy, then we must act swiftly to contain the damage and prevent further evil from spreading. But first, tell me true, is there nothing that can be done for those who still live beneath the mountain? Are they all lost beyond hope of salvation? Gandalf shook his head slowly. By the time any aid could reach them, the deed will be done. Smaug is mighty beyond the strength of any mortal army, and the secret ways that Borin opened will make resistance all but impossible. No, the people of Erebor and Dale must fend for themselves as best they may. Our concern now must be for the living and for preventing this evil from spreading further. Yet even as he spoke these words, a part of the wizard's mind was already turning toward other possibilities, other paths that might yet lead to hope in the midst of despair. For he remembered the words of a prophecy spoken long ago in the halls of Manwë, words that spoke of a time when the smallest and most overlooked of the world's creatures would play a part in the defeat of great evil. Perhaps if the right choices were made and the right paths taken, even this disaster might in time serve purposes that its architects had never intended. But that was a hope for another day. For now, there was only grief for the dead and the grim necessity of preparing for whatever new evil might emerge from the ashes of the lonely mountain. Section 10. Stirring the North. In the days that followed the fall of Erebor, when the smoke still rose from the ruin of Dale and the dragon's roar echoed through the valleys like thunder that would never die, Gandalf the Grey walked the hidden paths of Middle-earth with purpose grim as iron and hope fragile as spider silk. The news of the mountain's destruction had spread like wildfire through the north, carrying with it terror and despair, but also something else, a slow burning anger that might yet be fanned into the flame of resistance. His first road led him to the halls of the Iron Hills, where Dain Ironfoot ruled over the hardiest and most warlike of the Dwarven clans. Here, in caverns that rang with the sound of weapons being forged and the tramp of iron-shod boots, the wizard found fuel for the fire he sought to kindle. For Dain was cousin to Thror and had loved the old king well, and when word came of how Erebor had fallen through treachery from within, his wrath was terrible to behold. Borin the Black-hearted, growled Dain as he paced before his throne, his great axe gleaming in the firelight. Would that I could dig him from his grave and kill him again for the shame he has brought upon our people. But the deed is done, and no amount of wrath will bring back the dead or rebuild the mountain's halls. What would you have of me, wizard? The Iron Hills are strong, but not strong enough to challenge a dragon in his lair. Not yet, Gandalf replied, his grey eyes kindling with inner fire. But dragons are not immortal, Dain, son of Nine, and even the mightiest of them may fall if the right weapon is brought against them. I ask only that you ready your people for war, and when the call comes, be prepared to march, for I think the day will come when Smaug's reign of terror will end, and when it does, there must be those ready to reclaim what was lost. From the Iron Hills, the wizard's path led him westward to the Shire, that green land where the hobbits dwelt in peace and plenty, knowing little of the great affairs of the world. Here, in the comfortable hole of Bag End, he found Bilbo Baggins, tending his garden and thinking no thoughts more adventurous than which vegetables to plant for the autumn harvest. Yet there was something in the Hobbit that called to Gandalf's sight, a quality that few others possessed, a combination of courage and mercy, stubbornness and adaptability that might prove invaluable in the trials to come. More than that, there was in Bilbo a strange luck, a way of being in the right place at the right time that spoke of greater powers taking an interest in his fate. "Good morning, Mr. Baggins," said the wizard, appearing suddenly at the garden gate with a smile that held secrets within secrets. "A fine day for growing things, is it not? Though I wonder if you have ever thought of growing in yourself, of stretching your roots beyond the borders of this comfortable soil." Bilbo looked up from his turnips with a start, for he had been deep in contemplation of whether to plant them in rows or clusters. "Growing?" he asked, puzzled. "I'm quite grown enough already, thank you. 48 years old and perfectly satisfied with my size, if you must know. And who are you to be asking such peculiar questions?" "I am Gandalf," replied the wizard, his smile widening. "And as for peculiar questions, I find they often lead to the most interesting answers. Tell me, have you ever wondered what lies beyond the borders of the Shire? Have you ever felt the call of distant mountains or heard the whisper of ancient treasures waiting in the dark?" Something flickered in Bilbo's eyes at these words, some ember of the adventurous spirit that had burned in his ancestor Bandobras Took. but it was quickly smothered by the comfortable complacency of his Baggins heritage. "Certainly not," he said firmly. "Adventure is a nasty, uncomfortable thing that makes you late for dinner and gets your clothes dirty. I'm quite content here in Bag End. Thank you very much." Yet Gandalf had seen the flicker, brief though it was, and he filed the knowledge away for future use. For the time was not yet ripe for such seeds to sprout. But when it came, when the need was great and the hour dark, he would remember the Hobbit of Bag End and the spark of Tookish daring that slept within his comfortable heart. Meanwhile, in the Blue Mountains far to the west, other preparations were being made. In the halls of Thorin Oakenshield, last heir of the royal line of Erebor, news of his grandfather's death and his people's exile had kindled a fire that burned bright and fierce. Here was no comfortable hobbit or practical dwarf lord, but a king in exile who burned with a desire to reclaim his birthright and restore his people's honor. "The time has come," declared Thorin to his followers, his voice ringing through the exile halls like the sound of hammer on anvil. "Too long have we dwelt in exile. Too long have we been content to scratch out a living in these western caves while our true home lies in ruins. I will gather a company, the bravest and most skilled of our people, and we will return to Erebor. The dragon may be mighty, but he is not invincible. And if we can find the key to the secret door—" His words trailed off, for the key to the mountain's secret entrance had been lost when Thror fell, and without it, even the hidden door would remain sealed against them. Yet hope was not entirely dead, for Gandalf had whispered in certain ears that such a key might yet exist, carried by those who had escaped the mountain's fall. All across the north, the seeds of future action were being sown. In the halls of the dwarves, weapons were being forged and battle plans laid. In the Shire, a hobbit tended his garden and dreamed dreams he did not understand. And in the tower of Dol Guldur, the necromancer watched it all and smiled, for he saw only the movements of pieces on a game board, and did not yet perceive the hand of Eru that moved in ways beyond the sight for even the wisest. Section 11. A Hobbit Remembered. The green hills of the Shire rolled away beneath the summer sun, like waves upon a peaceful sea, and in the gardens of Bag End the flowers bloomed with all the innocent beauty of a world that knew nothing of dragons or dark sorcery. Here, where the greatest concern was whether the cabbages would be ready for the harvest feast, Bilbo Baggins sat upon his favourite bench and watched the bees dancing among his honeysuckle vines. It had been 3 months since the strange grey wizard had appeared at his gate with his peculiar questions about adventure and distant mountains, and in all that time, Bilbo's life had returned to its comfortable rhythm of meals and gardening, pipe smoking, and afternoon naps. Yet sometimes, in the quiet hours between dawn and sunrise, he would find himself standing at his round green door and looking eastward toward the misty mountains, wondering what lay beyond their jagged peaks. "Ridiculous," he would mutter to himself, shaking his curly head and retreating to the safety of his well-appointed pantry. "Perfectly ridiculous. I'm a Baggins of Bag End, not some wild took with wanderlust in his veins. Adventure indeed, as if I would ever dream of leaving my comfortable home for the sake of nasty, uncomfortable things like danger and excitement." But the seed that Gandalf had planted was hardier than Bilbo knew, and it grew in the dark soil of his dreams, sending up shoots of curiosity that he could not entirely suppress. He found himself reading the old books in his study with new attention, particularly those that told of the great kingdoms of the dwarves and the treasure hoards that lay hidden in the roots of mountains. And when merchants from Bree came through the Shire with news from the outside world, he lingered longer than was proper to listen to their tales. It was from such merchants that he first heard whispers of the fall of Erebor, though the news came filtered through many mouths and much embellished in the telling. A great dragon had awakened in the north, they said, and burned the dwarf kingdom to ash and ruin. The survivors had fled into exile, scattered to the four winds, while the worm made his lair in the treasure chambers that had once echoed with the sound of hammers and songs. "Terrible business," said Bilbo to his reflection in the mirror as he brushed his hair before breakfast. "Though I suppose it's no concern of mine. What happens in distant mountains has nothing to do with the Shire after all. We're quite safe here in our green hills with our round doors and our well-stocked pantries." Yet even as he spoke these sensible words, he found himself thinking of the wizard's smile and the secrets it had seemed to hold. What was it Gandalf had said about being in the right place at the right time? Something about the smallest folk playing the greatest parts in the affairs of the world. Nonsense, of course. But there had been something in the grey eyes that suggested the wizard saw more than he let on. That evening, as Bilbo sat smoking his pipe on the bench outside his door, a curious thing happened. A thrush came and perched upon his gatepost, a fine bird with a speckled breast and bright black eyes. It cocked its head and looked at him with such intelligence that he almost felt it was trying to tell him something important. "Hello there, my fine fellow," he said, amused by the bird's boldness. "And what brings you to Bag End at this hour? Surely you should be off to your roost with the sun already setting." The thrush opened its beak and sang a few notes of haunting beauty, then spread its wings and flew away toward the east, disappearing into the gathering dusk. But something in its song lingered in Bilbo's mind, like an echo of forgotten melodies, and he found himself humming the tune as he locked his door and prepared for bed. That night, his dreams were filled with mountains and underground halls, with the gleam of gold and the sound of distant music. He saw himself walking through corridors carved from living rock, past chambers filled with treasures beyond counting, towards some purpose he could not name but felt in his bones to be important. And always, at the edge of his vision, there walked a grey figure with a staff and a wide-brimmed hat, beckoning him onward into adventures he could not imagine. He woke with the dawn, his heart racing with excitement he could not explain, and for the first time in his comfortable life, the walls of Bag End seemed not cozy, but confining. The wandering blood of the Tooks stirred in his veins, faint but undeniable, and he found himself once again standing at his door and looking toward the distant mountains. "Perhaps," he said to the morning air, "perhaps there's more to the world than gardens and pantries. Perhaps even a Baggins might find himself called to something greater." But the moment passed, as such moments do, and he retreated once more to the safety of breakfast and the morning post. Yet the seed continued to grow, and Gandalf, riding the hidden paths of Middle-earth on errands that few could guess, smiled to himself and marked another thread in the tapestry he was weaving. For the wizard knew, as few others did, that the greatest quests often begin not with the bold proclamations of heroes, but with the quiet stirrings of curiosity in the hearts of the most unlikely folk. And in the green hills of the Shire, surrounded by all the comfort and safety that money could buy, Bilbo Baggins was becoming something he had never been before, ready for adventure, whether he knew it or not. Section 12. The plan set in motion. In the Blue Mountains, where the exiled dwarves of Erebor had made their dwelling among the stone-carved halls of their kinfolk, the winter winds howled like the voices of the dead, and in those winds, Thorin Oakenshield heard the call of his birthright. 7 times 7 years had passed since Smaug's coming had driven his people from their ancient home, and in all that time, the fire of reclamation had never died in his heart. The halls of Thorin's exile were noble enough, carved from good grey stone and lit with the warm glow of forge fires, yet they could never be more than a pale shadow of the glory that had been Erebor. Here, the ceilings were low and the corridors narrow, built for a lesser people in a lesser time. The treasure chambers, such as they were, held only a fraction of the wealth that had once gleamed in the halls beneath the lonely mountain, and even the finest works of their smiths seemed crude when measured against the masterpieces that lay now in the dragon's hoard. It was to these halls that Gandalf the Grey came walking in the grey hour before dawn, when the guards drowsed at their posts, and even the keen ears of the dwarves were dulled by sleep and sorrow. He came not by the great gates, which were watched by warriors in mail of steel, but by the hidden ways that he had learned in his long wandering, paths known only to the wise and to those who served purposes greater than the knowledge of any single age. He found Thorin in the Chamber of Memory, that hall where the dwarves kept the records of their ancient glory and the maps of halls they might never see again. The king in exile sat before a table of black stone, and spread upon it were charts and documents that told the tale of Erebor's founding and the long years of its growing. In his hands was a key of silver and steel, cunningly wrought in the shape of a raven, and his eyes were fixed upon it with an intensity that spoke of thoughts too deep for words. "Thorin, son of Thrain," said Gandalf softly, his voice carrying easily through the silence. "The years have been long since last we spoke, and longer still since you have looked upon the halls of your fathers." The Dwarf King lifted his head, and in his eyes was the light of one who sees hope where others see only darkness. "Gandalf the Grey," he replied, rising to offer the greeting due to an honored guest. "Your coming is well timed, for I have much need of wise counsel in the days ahead. Tell me, what news do you bring from the wide world? Have you learned aught of the dragon's movements, or of the state of the mountain's defenses?" "I have learned much," replied the wizard, seating himself upon a chair of carved stone. "Some of it may bring you hope, though much of it will bring you sorrow. The dragon sleeps now upon his hoard, glutted with conquest and drunk upon the gold of your fathers. His watch has grown lax, for he believes himself secure in his stolen halls. Yet the way to his defeat lies not in open battle, for he is mighty beyond the strength of armies, but in cunning and stealth and the kind of luck that favors the bold." Thorin's grip tightened upon the silver key, and his voice was rough with long-suppressed emotion. "Speak plainly, wizard. Do you bring me hope of reclaiming what was lost? Or do you come only to torture me with dreams that can never be fulfilled?" In answer, Gandalf drew from his robes a map of ancient parchment, yellowed with age and marked with the secret signs of the Dwarf kings. Upon it were drawn the halls and passages of Erebor as they had been in the days of glory, and marked in red ink was a way that few remembered, the hidden door that Thrain I had carved in the western face of the mountain, disguised so cunningly that even the dragon's keen eyes had not found it. "This is the secret way," said Gandalf, his finger tracing the path upon the map, "known only to the kings of Durin's line and to those they trusted with their deepest secrets. The door opens only upon Durin's day, when the last moon of autumn and the sun shine together upon the keyhole. With this key and this map, a small company might enter Erebor unseen and strike at the dragon while he sleeps." "A small company," repeated Thorin, his voice barely above a whisper. "But who would dare such a thing? What warriors would be mad enough to enter the lair of Smaug the Mighty for the sake of gold and glory?" 12 companions I would choose," replied Gandalf, his eyes bright with the fire of planning. 12 of the bravest and most skilled among your people, each sworn to secrecy and bound by oath to follow where you lead. But there is more. The company must number 13 for luck, as was foretold in the prophecies of old. And for that 13th member, I have in mind one whose worth is greater than his size might suggest. He spoke then of Bilbo Baggins, of the Shire, of the luck that followed him, and the courage that slept within his comfortable heart. He told of the blood of the Tooks that ran in the Hobbit's veins, and of the part that such folk might play in the great affairs of the world, though few would think to look for heroism in the green hills and cozy holes of the Shire. "A Hobbit?" said Thorin, his voice filled with doubt. "What use could such a creature be in the halls of a dragon? Hobbits are soft folk, fond of their comfort and fearful of any danger greater than a burnt dinner. How could one of them succeed where warriors might fail?" "By being what no one expects," Gandalf replied with a smile. "Smaug has grown used to the scent and sound of dwarves, men and elves. His treasure smell knows these folk and their ways. But a hobbit, that is a scent unknown to dragonkind, a presence so unexpected that it might slip past even the keenest watch. Moreover, there is in Bilbo Baggins a quality that all the gold in Erebor cannot buy, a good heart, unmarked by the greed that corrupts so many who seek dragon gold. Through the long hours of that night, they planned and plotted, choosing the members of the company and laying out the route that would take them from the Blue Mountains to the Lonely Mountain. 12 companions would accompany Thorin, Balin and Dwalin, Fili and Kylie, Dori and Nori and Ori, Oin and Gloin, Bifur and Bofur and Bombur, each chosen for their particular skills and their unquestioning loyalty to the rightful king. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows of the Chamber of Memory, the plan was set. In the spring, when the roads were clear and the passes open, the company would set forth upon their quest. First to the Shire, to secure the services of one unlikely burglar, then eastward by the hidden paths to the Lonely Mountain and whatever fate awaited them there. "It is a desperate plan," said Thorin as he rolled up the precious map. "Much depends upon luck and timing, and if we fail, there will be no second chance. All the greatest deeds in the history of Middle-earth have been desperate plans," replied Gandalf, "and often it is the smallest folk who tip the balance between success and failure. Have hope, Thorin Oakenshield. The hour is dark, but it is not yet the darkest hour. And while hope remains, miracles may yet come to pass. With those words, the wizard took his leave, setting forth once more upon the roads that led to all the corners of Middle-earth. Behind him in the Blue Mountains, Thorin began the careful work of choosing and preparing his companions, while far away in the Shire, Bilbo Baggins tended his garden and dreamed dreams he did not understand. The web was nearly woven, the threads almost ready to be drawn tight. Soon, very soon, the greatest adventure in the history of the Shire would begin, though none of its participants yet knew the full scope of what they were about to undertake. Section 13. The Fire Awakens. In the desolation beneath the lonely mountain, where the bones of Dale lay white as chalk in the perpetual shadow of Smaug's wings, the great worm stirred upon his bed of gold and felt the first faint stirrings of unease. For 5 years he had slept the chee sleep of the glutted predator, counting his stolen treasure in dreams, and waking only to feast upon the flocks and herds of the wide lands around the mountain. Yet now, in the depths of his dragon mind, something whispered of changes in the wind, of purposes moving in the world that might touch even his invincible stronghold. The hoard beneath him shifted and rang with the music of precious metal as he raised his great head and tasted the air with forked tongue. Gold there was in abundance, more gold than had been gathered in any single place since the making of the world, and silver and gems and precious things beyond the counting of mortal minds. Yet beneath the familiar sense of treasure and decay, he caught a trace of something else, something that spoke of distant planning and the movement of armed folk upon the roads. Dwarves, he thought, and his eyes kindled with the fire that had once reduced Dale to ash and ruin. The little folk of the mountain remember their ancient halls and dream still of reclaiming what they have lost. But let them come, if they dare. The gates are sealed with flame, and death awaits any who would steal so much as a single coin from the hoard of Smaug the Mighty. Yet even as he spoke these words to the echoing darkness of his lair, the dragon's cunning mind was already working upon the problem of defense. He had grown mighty in the years of his reign, his scales harder than the steel of kings, his fire hotter than the forges of the dwarves. Yet he was not fool enough to think himself beyond all peril, for the memory of dragon slayers lived long in the songs of men, and he had heard tell of weapons that could pierce even the hide of the great worms. From his bed of gold, he sent forth his will like a searching wind, calling to all the creatures of malice that served his dominion. Orcs came creeping from the caves of the grey mountains, their yellow eyes bright with the promise of slaughter. Wargs loped down from the high places, their jaws slavering with hunger for the flesh of horses. Even the great spiders that had begun to infest the southern reaches of Mirkwood felt his summons and began to weave their webs along the paths that led toward the lonely mountain. But greatest of all his servants was one who came not in flesh but in spirit, a presence of shadow and malice that spoke to him in the tongue that had no words, the dark speech that pierced straight to the heart of evil. "My mighty servant," whispered the voice of the necromancer across the leagues that lay between Dol Guldur and Erebor. "The hour approaches when your vigilance will be tested, as it has not been tested since first you claimed the mountain. The dwarves gather their strength for one last attempt to reclaim their ancient home, and with them rides one whose power you have not yet learned to fear. I fear nothing, Smaug replied, in the same soundless speech, his mental voice thick with pride and wrath. Let the little folk come if they will. Their bones will join those of their kinsmen, who fell when first I claimed this place, and their gold will swell my hoard to even greater glory. Beware overconfidence, the necromancer counseled, though there was approval in his tone. The wizard Gandalf moves in this matter, and he has ever been cunning beyond the understanding of most. Yet there are ways to turn even his cunning to our advantage, if you are willing to be guided by wisdom greater than your own. The dragon's pride bristled at the suggestion that any wisdom could be greater than his own. Yet he had learned in his long life to value the counsel of the shadow when it was freely given. Speak then, and I will listen. What would you have me do? When they come, and they will come, for the wizard's plans are already set in motion, do not destroy them too quickly. Play with them as a cat plays with mice. Let them think they have some chance of success. In their desperation, they may reveal secrets that would otherwise remain hidden, and in their hope, they may commit follies that will serve our greater purpose. Images flowed between them then, visions of the future that might be shaped by cunning and patience. The dragon saw himself not merely as guardian of a hoard, but as instrument of a will that reached across all Middle-earth, striking blows against the free peoples that would echo through the ages. The fall of the kingdom under the mountain had been only the beginning. With the right moves at the right time, the shadow might spread from the lonely mountain to consume all the north. It shall be as you counsel, Smaug replied at length, his great mind already working upon the possibilities. But know this, if these intruders prove too troublesome, if they threaten even the smallest part of my treasure, I will burn them to ash without regard for any greater plan. The hoard is mine, and I will suffer no rival in its possession. Of course, the necromancer agreed, and there was something like laughter in his mental voice. Your treasure is sacred to you, as it should be. I ask only that you remember. Sometimes the greatest treasure is won not by hoarding, but by spending wisely when the moment is right. The connection faded like smoke on the wind, leaving Smaug alone with his gold and his growing anticipation. Around the mountain, his servants took up their positions, orcs in the ruined halls of Dale, wargs in the passes that led up from the south, spiders spinning their webs across the hidden ways. All was in readiness for the coming of those who would dare to steal from the hoard of Smaug the Mighty. Yet in the dragon's heart, beneath the layers of pride and malice and ancient greed, there stirred something that might almost have been unease. For there had been something in the necromancer's tone, a note of hidden purpose that suggested the shadow's plans ran deeper than even Smaug suspected. But such thoughts were quickly buried beneath the familiar certainties of claw and flame and the power that had made him master of the lonely mountain. Let them come, he thought, as he settled back upon his bed of gold. Let all the world come, if it dared. He was Smaug the Mighty, Smaug the Invincible, and his fire would consume any who threatened what was his. High above, storm clouds gathered around the peak of the lonely mountain, and thunder rolled across the desolation like the laughter of dragons. Section 14. A blade, not yet drawn. In the southern reaches of Mirkwood, where the shadows had begun to deepen and the trees to whisper of things that should not be, the borders of the woodland realm stood under guard, as they had not stood since the days of the last alliance. Elven warriors in mail of silver and green walked the boundaries of their king's domain, and their keen eyes watched always toward the south, where Dol Guldur squatted upon its hill like a canker upon the fair face of the world. It was here, in a glade where silver malon trees had once grown tall and fair, that Legolas Greenleaf came upon the first signs of the corruption that was spreading northward from the necromancer's stronghold. The trees were twisted now, their bark black as charcoal, their leaves fallen, though spring was newly come to the world. And among their roots crawled things that should not have existed, spiders the size of ponies, their eyes gleaming with malice and their mandibles dripping with poison that could kill a horse. The prince of the woodland realm moved through this place of shadow with the silence of wind through leaves, his bow strung and ready in his hands. 23 of the great spiders had he slain already since dawn, yet still more came creeping from the dark places, drawn by some will that reached out from Dol Guldur to command their service. This was more than the natural evil that had always dwelt in the deep places of the wood. This was corruption with purpose, malice given direction and intent. Behind him walked Toriel of the Woodland Guard, her knives bright as starlight in the green gloom. She was young as the elves counted years, yet already her skill with blade and bow was legend among her people, and her hatred for the creatures of shadow burned bright as flame in her heart. "They grow bolder," she said, as her knife found the heart of another spider and sent its foul spirit back to the darkness that had spawned it. Each day they press further into the clean lands, and each day their numbers seem to grow. If this continues, they will overrun the southern borders entirely. "Not while we live to guard them," Legolas replied, his keen eyes scanning the twisted trees for signs of movement. "Yet you speak truly. This is more than random evil. There is intelligence behind this assault, a mind that guides these creatures towards some purpose we have not yet divined. We must carry word to my father, and swiftly, for I fear this is but the first move in some greater game." They made their way through the corrupted forest with the speed of those who knew every root and stone of their native land. Yet even their elven swiftness could not outpace the sense of urgency that drove them. For in the growing darkness of the wood, they had glimpsed something that filled even their fearless hearts with dread. Armies of orcs marching beneath black banners, wargs running in packs 100 strong, and over all the shadow of wings too vast to belong to any creature that walked in the light of the sun. The hall of Thranduil echoed with the sound of weapons being prepared and warriors taking counsel, for the king of the woodland realm had heard the reports of his scouts and understood their meaning better than any. This was war, not the small skirmishes and border raids that had marked the long years of uneasy peace, but war such as had not been seen since the last alliance rode to the gates of Mordor. "The shadow moves at last," said the king as he stood before his throne, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of watchfulness and preparation. "Long have we guarded against this day, yet now that it comes, I confess I had hoped it might never arrive. How many can we muster, Galion? How many warriors stand ready to defend the borders of the free world?" The captain of the guard stepped forward, his face grim beneath the silver circlet that marked his rank. 3,000 spears can be raised within the day, my lord, and twice that number within a week, if we call upon the scattered settlements. Yet if the reports of our scouts are true, we face odds that even the might of the firstborn may not be able to match. The orcs alone number in the tens of thousands, and behind them marches the darkness of Dol Guldur itself. Then we must hope that we do not stand alone, Thranduil replied, his thoughts already turning to the messages he must send and the alliances he must forge. The wise ones have long prepared for this day, though they may not yet know that the hour has come. Summon the swiftest of our riders. Messages must go forth to Lothlorien, to Rivendell, to the Grey Havens, and to all who would stand against the shadow. Let them know that the war they have long dreaded has begun at last. As the messengers sped forth on horses fleet, as the wind, carrying word of war to all the realms of the free peoples, Legolas stood upon the battlements of his father's hall and gazed southward toward the growing darkness. In his heart, he felt the weight of prophecy, the knowledge that the battles to come would test the very foundations of the world. Yet there was no fear in him, only the grim resolve that had sustained his people through all the long years of watching and waiting. Beside him, Tauriel placed a hand upon her sword hilt, and her voice was soft as silk and hard as steel. The darkness spreads, my prince, yet it has not conquered all. In the west, the havens of the elves still shine with the light of Arundel's star. In the north, the kingdoms of men stand ready to defend their lands, and even in the Shire, where the little folk tend their gardens in peace, there burns a light that no shadow can extinguish. True words, Legolas agreed, his keen eyes marking the flight of an eagle high above the corrupted forest. Yet I fear that before this war is ended, all these lights will be tested as they have not been tested since the world was young. The enemy has been patient, building his strength in the shadows while we have grown comfortable in our vigilance. Now comes the time when we will learn whether the free peoples have the courage to stand against the darkness that threatens to consume all things. The wind that blew from the south carried upon it the scent of smoke and corruption, of armies on the march, and great engines of war being forged in the pits of Dol Guldur. Yet it carried also something else, the whisper of hope, faint but undying, that spoke of light still burning in the darkness, and of the courage that might yet prevail when all seemed lost. The blade had not yet been drawn from its sheath, but the time of drawing was at hand. In the halls of the Woodland King, in the towers of the wise, in the simple halls of the Shire itself, the free peoples prepared for the war that would determine the fate of Middle-earth. Section 15. The kingdom reclaimed the thrush that sang upon the slopes of the lonely mountain in the grey hour before dawn, carried in its voice the memory of older songs, of times when the halls, beneath the stone, rang with the laughter of dwarves, and the streets of Dale echoed with the voices of children. For 5 years had Smaug the Mighty held dominion over the desolation, counting his stolen gold in dreams of fire and waking only to spread terror through the wide lands that lay beneath his shadow. Yet on this day, the day that would be remembered in song and story while the world endured, the wheels of fortune began at last to turn. From the west came riding a company small in number, yet great in purpose, 13 companions bound by oath and hope, and the slim chance that courage might triumph where armies had failed. At their head rode Thorin Oakenshield, rightful king under the mountain, and beside him walked one whose worth had yet to be proven in the fires of trial, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire, burglar and bearer of a ring whose power was hidden even from his own sight. The secret door in the western face of Erebor stood open as it had not stood since the days of Thror's glory, its ancient mechanisms responding at last to the key of silver and steel that had been carried so long in exile. Through that hidden way, the company had entered the halls of their fathers, moving like shadows through corridors where dragonfire had left its mark upon the very stones. Deep in the heart of the mountain, where the greatest treasures of Durin's line had been gathered through long centuries of craft and conquest, Smaug lay upon his bed of gold and felt the first faint stirrings of alarm. Some presence walked in his domain that had no right to be there, some scent upon the air that spoke of theft and violation. Yet when he lifted his great head and sent forth his will to search the halls, he found nothing, only the echo of footsteps that might have been the settling of old stones, and a whisper of movement that might have been the wind through abandoned doorways. Cunning, he thought, and his eyes kindled with interest rather than wrath. Very cunning indeed. But all cunning creatures leave traces for those who know how to read them, and I have been master of these halls longer than most mortals draw breath. The hunt that followed was a thing of legend even among the deeds of dragons, a game of cat and mouse played through the vast halls and endless passages of Erebor. Smaug's keen senses sought always for the intruders who dared to violate his domain, while the company moved with desperate stealth through ways they knew as children know the rooms of their homes. Yet it was not dwarf cunning alone that preserved them in that dreadful hour, but the courage of the smallest among them, Bilbo Baggins, who crept through the dragon's very lair and spoke face to face with Smaug himself, matching riddles with the great worm and winning from him knowledge that would prove the key to all that followed. For dragons, mighty though they may be, are not without weakness, and in his pride Smaug revealed that which he should have kept hidden. One scale, one small gap in his armor of horn and steel, lay bare upon his left breast where the point of a bow might find its mark. And this knowledge, won at such peril by the Hobbit's courage, would soon prove the dragon's doom. The battle that followed shook the very roots of the lonely mountain, as Smaug, in his wrath, burst forth from his halls and brought fire and ruin to all the lands around. Yet his rage blinded him to the true danger that awaited, for in the ruins of Dale there stood a man whose name would be remembered with honor while the world endured. Bard the bowman, last heir of the kings of Dale, with bow of yew and arrow of steel in his hand. Black was the arrow that Bard drew to his ear, black as the shadow that lay upon the north, yet its point gleamed bright with the light of righteousness. Straight flew that shaft when the bull sang its song of vengeance, straight to the one gap in Smaug's mighty armor that the dragon's own pride had revealed. Deep pierced the point into the great worm's heart, and with a cry that shattered windows in the halls of the woodland king, Smaug the mighty fell from the sky like a star cast down from heaven. The waters of the long lake boiled and steamed where the dragon's body struck them, and the sound of his falling was heard from the grey mountains to the borders of Lothlorien. Yet even as his fire was quenched forever in the cold depths, new fires kindled in the hearts of those who had suffered under his dominion. For Smaug was dead, and the treasure of Erebor lay open to any bold enough to claim it. From the halls of the Woodland King came marching the elven host, their banners bright in the morning sun, and their weapons singing songs of ancient glory. From the ruins of Dale came the men of the lake, led by Bard, their new king, seeking recompense for the years of suffering they had endured. And from the Iron Hills came Dine Ironfoot, at the head of 500 warriors, marching to the aid of his kinsman Thorin and the reclamation of the kingdom under the mountain. What followed was a battle fought not merely for gold and glory, but for the very shape of the future, the Battle of 5 Armies, where dwarves and men and elves stood together at last against the hosts of darkness that came pouring from the north. For the necromancer's plans had not died with Smaug, and orcs and wargs and creatures of shadow beyond counting had been marshalled for this hour, seeking to claim for their master the treasure hoard that no single hand should hold. Yet in the end, it was not sword or spear that turned the tide of battle, but the wings of the great eagles and the courage of those who chose to stand together rather than fall divided. Thorin Oakenshield fell with honor in that fight, defending the gates of his father's halls with his life's blood. Yet even in death, he had achieved his heart's desire. The kingdom under the mountain was free once more, and his people could return to the halls that had been their birthright since the world was young. In the peace that followed, when the dead had been honored and the treasure fairly divided, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire made ready for his long journey home. In his pocket lay a golden ring, simple and unadorned, that he had found in the dark places beneath the misty mountains. A magic ring, he thought it, for it had the power to make its wearer invisible, a useful thing for a burglar, though he little suspected the true nature of what he carried. The seeds of the greatest adventure in the history of Middle-earth had been sown, though none yet knew what harvest they would bring. In the Shire, the gardens bloomed fair as ever, and Bag End waited for its master's return. Yet the world had changed, and with it, the destiny of all who dwelt beneath the stars. Section 16. A Ring Still Sleeps. The years that followed the reclamation of Erebor brought peace to much of the north, yet to the wise it was a peace edged with foreboding, like the stillness that comes before the breaking of a great storm. In Bag End, Bilbo Baggins settled once more into the comfortable routines of Hobbit life, tending his garden and writing in the Red Book the tale of his great adventure. Yet sometimes, in the quiet hours between dawn and sunrise, he would find himself turning the golden ring over in his fingers and wondering at the strange dreams that had begun to trouble his sleep. The ring lay upon his mantelpiece, like any other trinket brought back from distant travels. Yet there were times when it seemed to whisper to him in voices he could not quite understand. "My precious," he would murmur absently as he polished its golden surface, though he could not say why those words came to his lips or what they meant. It was only a magic ring, after all, useful for avoiding unwanted visitors and for slipping away from tedious social obligations, but surely nothing more significant than that. In the halls of learning, where the wise kept their vigil against the darkness, other thoughts were stirring. The fall of Smaug had removed a great threat from the world, yet it had also left a vacuum that other powers might seek to fill. In Rivendell, Elrond walked in his gardens and pondered the reports that came to him from all corners of Middle-earth, while in Lothlorien, Galadriel gazed into her mirror and saw shadows that had not yet taken shape. Most troubling of all was the silence from Dol Guldur, the hill of sorcery that squatted like a cancer in the heart of Mirkwood. For years, the necromancer had grown in power and malice, yet now, when his schemes should have reached their culmination, he seemed to have withdrawn into shadow and silence. It was not like the enemy to abandon his purposes so easily, and the wise ones who remembered the tales of the elder days knew that sometimes the most dangerous foe was the one who could not be seen. "He gathers his strength," said Gandalf, as he stood in the Chamber of the Fire in Rivendell, his grey eyes fixed upon flames that danced with memories of ancient light. The fall of Erebor was but one move in a game whose scope we have only begun to understand. Now he retreats to plan his next assault, and when it comes, it will be with power greater than any he has shown before. "Yet what can we do save watch and wait?" asked Elrond, his ageless face marked with the weight of years beyond counting. "We have driven him from Dol Guldur, scattered his immediate servants, yet we know he is not destroyed. Like a shadow he moves, taking new shapes and seeking new strongholds from which to launch his assault upon the free world. In the Tower of Orthanc, where Saruman the White kept his vigil as head of the Order of Wizards, other councils were being taken. The great library that filled the tower from foundation to summit held lore gathered from all the ages of the world, and in those ancient texts were hints and fragments that spoke of rings of power and the dominion they might grant to those who wielded them wisely. 9 for mortal men doomed to die, read Saruman from a scroll of ancient parchment, his voice echoing in the high chamber where he sat surrounded by instruments of seeing and learning. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 3 for the elven kings under the sky. Yet where is the one that was rumoured to rule them all? Lost, say the tales, cast into the fires of Mount Doom when Isildur cut it from the hand of the Dark Lord himself. Yet what if it were not lost? What if it lay hidden somewhere in Middle-earth, waiting for one with the wisdom to claim it? Such thoughts were dangerous, yet they came increasingly to occupy the White Wizard's mind as he pondered the problem of the growing shadow. For Saruman was mighty among the wise, yet even his power had limits, and he had begun to wonder if there might not be other paths to victory than those his order had always followed. If the One Ring could indeed be found and claimed by one who served the light rather than the darkness, might it not become an instrument of good rather than evil? In the Shire, the seasons turned as they always had, and the hobbits went about their peaceful business with little thought for the great affairs of the world beyond their borders. Yet even there, in the most remote and protected of all the free lands, change was stirring. Bilbo had begun to age more slowly than was natural, remaining hale and hearty, while his contemporaries grew grey and bent with the weight of years. His neighbours marked it and wondered, though none suspected the true cause of his extended youth. The ring that lay so innocently upon his mantelpiece pulsed with power older than the foundations of the world, power that had been forged in the fires of Mount Doom by one whose name was feared from the grey havens to the Sea of Rune. Yet it slumbered still, its true nature hidden even from those who might have recognized it for what it was. For the time of its revealing had not yet come, and the hand that would ultimately decide its fate was still young and untested. living in innocence in the green hills of the Shire. In Mordor, in the fortress of Barad-dûr that pierced the sky like a black spear, Sauron the Great sat upon his throne of iron and felt the pulse of his lost ring like a distant heartbeat. Stronger had he grown in his new stronghold, mightier than he had been, even in the days of his service to Morgoth. Yet still, he lacked the one thing that would make his victory certain, the ring that was his by right of making, the ring that held within itself the power to dominate all other rings and all who wore them. Soon, he whispered to the darkness that surrounded him, his voice like the grinding of millstones in the deep places of the earth. Soon the hour will come when the ring calls to its master, and then shall all the world learn what it means to defy the Lord of the earth. But not yet. The time is not yet ripe, and there are still preparations to be made. The web was vast and complex, stretching across all of Middle-earth and binding together the fates of great and small alike. In the Shire, a hobbit polished his ring and dreamed uneasy dreams. In the halls of the wise, ancient minds pondered the shape of things to come, and in the darkness, patient as stone and implacable as time itself, the true enemy waited for his hour to strike. The War of the Ring was still years away, yet already the pieces were moving on the great game board of Middle-earth, and the fate of all the free peoples hung in the balance. The ring slept still, but its sleep was not peaceful, and in its dreams echoed the malice of the one who had made it, and the doom that would come upon the world when it awakened at last. Section 17. The enemy withdraws. In the fortress of Dol Guldur, where malice had festered like a wound in the heart of Mirkwood for nigh on 1,000 years, the stones themselves seemed to sigh with relief as shadow lifted from shadow and darkness retreated into deeper darkness still. The necromancer was gone, his foul presence withdrawn to the black lands beyond the Efelduath. Yet his going was not defeat, but strategy, a withdrawal planned and executed with all the cunning that had made him mightiest of Morgoth's servants in the days of the world's youth. Gandalf the Grey stood in the highest chamber of the tower, where the necromancer had kept his seat of power, and breathed air that was slowly cleansing itself of the corruption that had tainted it for so long. Around him, the other members of the White Council worked with words of unbinding and songs of cleansing, seeking to purge from the ancient stones the last traces of the evil that had dwelt there. "It is done," said Galadriel, Lady of the Golden Wood, her voice carrying the music of running water and wind through leaves. Yet there was no triumph in her tone, only the weariness of one who has achieved victory at great cost. "The fortress is cleansed, the servants of darkness scattered to the winds. Yet I fear we have accomplished nothing save to drive the spider deeper into his web." "You speak truly," replied Elrond of Rivendell, his keen eyes scanning the chamber where so much evil had been planned and set in motion. This was but one stronghold among many, and not the greatest. Even now, I doubt not, the enemy makes ready his true seat of power in the land that was once called Mordor. We have won a skirmish, yet the war remains to be fought. Saruman the White said nothing, though his thoughts ran deep as underground rivers. In his hands was the Palantir of Orthanc, the seeing stone that had been the necromancer's window upon the world. And in its depths he had glimpsed visions that filled him with both hope and dread. For he had seen the Ring of Power, the Master Ring that had been lost for so many years, and though its location remained hidden, he now knew with certainty that it still existed somewhere in Middle-earth. The knowledge burned in him like a flame, for Saruman was wisest of the Astari and understood better than any the potential that lay within such an artifact. With the One Ring in his possession, the forces of light might at last have a weapon capable of matching the enemy's power. Yet the ring was treacherous, as all the rings of power were treacherous, and the hand that claimed it might find itself claimed in turn by powers older and more subtle than mortal minds could comprehend. "What news from the Shire?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Have our watchers there observed anything unusual? Any signs that the peace of that land has been disturbed?" Gandalf turned from the window where he had been gazing westward toward the distant hills of the woodland realm. "Peace reigns in the Shire as it has always done," he replied, though something in his voice suggested deeper currents beneath the surface calm. Bilbo Baggins has returned to his comfortable hole and his well-ordered life. He writes his memoirs and tends his garden, and if he dreams strange dreams or finds himself speaking to shadows in languages he does not know, well, such things are not unknown among those who have walked in dark places and returned to tell the tale. "Yet you suspect something more?" pressed Elrond, his keen perception reading the subtle signs that others might miss. "I suspect many things," the Grey Wizard replied. "I suspect that our enemy's retreat is not the end of his plans, but merely a pause while he gathers strength for greater assaults. I suspect that the peace we have won will prove all too brief, and that the trials ahead will test the very foundations of the free world. And I suspect—" He paused, his grey eyes distant with thought. "I suspect that the smallest folk will once again play the greatest part in the salvation or doom of all. The cleansing of Dol Guldur continued through the long watches of the night, yet even as the White Council worked to purge the corruption from stone and timber, shadow moved elsewhere in the world. In the black land of Mordor, where the fires of Mount Doom painted the sky red as blood, Sauron the Great began the building of his armies anew. The defeat at Dol Guldur had cost him nothing that could not be replaced, for his true strength lay not in any single fortress, but in the malice that filled his spirit and the patience that allowed him to plan across centuries as mortal men plan across seasons. From his throne in Barad-dûr, he sent forth his will to all the dark places of Middle-earth, calling to himself the creatures that served shadow and promising them rich rewards for faithful service. Orcs bred like vermin in the tunnels beneath the misty mountains, their numbers swelling with each passing year. In the far south, the men of Harad and the Easterlings felt the pull of his influence and began to speak in their councils of the weakness of the West and the glory that might be won by those bold enough to claim it. Yet always, through all his planning and preparation, Sauron's thoughts returned to the ring that had been cut from his hand so many years before. Somewhere in Middle-earth it lay hidden, perhaps forgotten by those who possessed it, certainly unrecognized for what it truly was. But it could not remain hidden forever, for the ring desired above all things to return to its master, and when the time was right, it would begin to call to him across the leagues with a voice that no power in Middle-earth could silence. The years would pass, 5, 10, perhaps even 50, before the next great crisis came upon the world. Time enough for armies to be raised and weapons forged, for alliances to be made and broken, for a new generation to grow to maturity, knowing nothing of the dark years that had preceded their birth. Yet when the storm came at last, it would make the War of the Last Alliance seem like a summer shower by comparison. For this time, the enemy would not make the mistakes that had led to his previous defeat. As dawn broke over the cleansed tower of Dol Guldur, the members of the White Council prepared to depart for their various realms, each carrying with them the knowledge that they had won only a temporary respite from the darkness. The real war lay ahead, and when it came, it would test not only their strength and wisdom, but the very spirit that drove them to resist the shadow at all. "Guard well the borders of your realms," said Galadriel as they made ready to go their separate ways. "Keep watch upon the roads and listen for the whispers that come on the wind from dark places. The enemy has withdrawn, but he has not surrendered, and the next time he shows his hand, it will be with power such as Middle-earth has never seen." With those words of warning, the White Council dispersed, each member returning to the tasks and vigilance that would occupy them in the years of seeming peace that lay ahead. Yet in their hearts, they knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning, the first chapter in a tale that would determine whether light or darkness would rule in Middle-earth when all the songs were sung and all the stories told. Section 18. Hope in Ashes. The seasons turned as they always had in the Shire, and the green hills rolled away beneath skies that knew nothing of the great affairs of the world beyond their borders. In Bag End, Bilbo Baggins sat in his study with the red book open before him, writing the final pages of the tale he called There and Back Again. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and outside his round windows, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall like stars coming to rest upon the earth. Yet as he wrote, his hand would sometimes pause above the parchment, and his eyes would turn to the golden ring that lay upon the mantelpiece like any other simple trinket. There were times, especially in the deep watches of the night, when he could swear he heard it whispering to him in voices that seemed familiar yet strange, speaking words in languages that stirred memories he could not quite recall. "My precious," he would murmur, reaching out to touch the smooth gold surface with fingers that trembled slightly. The words felt right upon his tongue, though he could not say why. And there was comfort in the rings, presence that went deeper than any magic he understood. It was his, won fairly in the dark beneath the misty mountains, and the thought of ever parting with it filled him with an unease that bordered on panic. In the wide world beyond the Shire, the wise kept their vigil as they had always done, yet their watching now was edged with a new urgency. The cleansing of Dol Guldur had brought them no lasting peace, for they knew that shadows once awakened do not easily return to slumber. In Rivendell, Elrond walked in his gardens and pondered the reports that came to him from the ranges of the north, while in Lothlorien, Galadriel gazed into her mirror and saw futures that filled her heart with both hope and dread. "The ring moves," she whispered to the night air, her voice barely audible above the singing of the wind through the malun trees. After long silence, it begins to stir, and with its stirring comes change that will shake the very foundations of the world. Yet whether that change brings salvation or doom remains to be seen. The rangers rode the wild roads with renewed purpose, their grey cloaks wet with rain, and their keen eyes searching always for signs of the enemy's servants. In the ruins of Fornost and the watchtowers of Amansul, they kept their lonely vigil, guarding the peaceful lands from threats that those who dwelt in safety would never know existed. Chief among them was one they called Strider, a grim man with the light of ancient kings in his eyes, though few would have recognized nobility in his weather-worn features and travel-stained cloak. In Isengard, Saruman the White sat in his tower of Orthanc and contemplated the palantir that had been recovered from Dol Guldur. The Seeing Stone showed him visions of armies gathering in the east and south, of the Dark Tower rising ever higher against the red sky of Mordor, of powers stirring that had slept since the world was young. Yet it showed him other things as well. Glimpses of a golden ring that held within itself the power to command all the other rings of power, the master ring that could tip the balance between light and darkness. If it could be found, he mused to the shadows that gathered thick around his chair, if it could be claimed by one with the wisdom to use it justly, then perhaps the free peoples might have a weapon capable of matching the enemy's strength. Yet where does it lie hidden? In what forgotten corner of Middle-earth does the most precious thing in all the world wait for the hand that will claim it? The answer, had he but known it, lay less than 200 leagues to the west, resting innocently upon the mantelpiece of the most comfortable home in the most peaceful corner of the most protected land in all of Middle-earth. Yet the ring's time of hiding was drawing to a close, for powers greater than the wisdom of the wise were moving in the world, and what had been lost would soon be found again. In the deep places of the earth, where the roots of mountains delved deeper than the knowledge of the dwarves, ancient things stirred to wakefulness. The Balrogs that had fled into darkness after Morgoth's fall felt the pulse of their master's distant malice and began to remember the taste of flame and shadow. In the grey havens, where the ships of the elves waited to carry the weary to the undying lands, Círdan, the shipwright, gazed westward across the sea and felt in his bones the approach of storms that would try all the strength of those who remained in Middle-earth. Yet in the Shire, spring came as it always had, and the gardens bloomed with flowers that knew nothing of the darkness gathering in the world beyond. Children played in the green lanes, and their laughter rang out clear as silver bells across the rolling hills. In the party field, preparations were already beginning for another summer feast, and the gossips of Hobbiton spoke of nothing more urgent than whether the Proudfoots would once again attempt to claim the prize for the largest pumpkin. Here, in this corner of peace and plenty, the future of all Middle-earth rested unknowing and unguessed, for the ring that lay so quietly upon Bilbo's mantelpiece would soon pass to other hands, young hands that had never known the weight of great responsibility, gentle hands that would bear a burden heavier than the foundations of the world. The Shire folk went about their business in blissful ignorance of the part they would play in the great drama that was even now beginning to unfold. Yet in their very innocence lay a strength that all the armies of darkness could not overcome. The War of the Ring lay yet in the future, separated from these peaceful days by years of seeming calm. Yet already the threads were being woven that would bind together the fates of hobbits and kings, of wizards and warriors, of all who would stand in the final battle between light and shadow. In the green hills of the Shire, hope grew like flowers in a garden, tended by hands that had never drawn sword or faced dragon, yet whose courage would prove greater than that of the mightiest heroes. For such is the way of the music that Eru Ilúvatar set in motion at the world's beginning, that the smallest voices often sing the most important parts, and that in the humblest hearts may be found the greatest love. The road stretched long and dark ahead, yet at its end lay not despair, but hope, not the victory of shadow, but the triumph of the light that no darkness could extinguish. In Bag End, the fire burned low, and Bilbo closed his book with a sigh of contentment. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the Shire in a blanket of white that spoke of peace and rest and the turning of the seasons in their proper time. Soon, very soon, other tales would begin, tales that would eclipse even the story of the Hobbit and the dragon in their scope and wonder. But that, as they say in the Shire, is another story entirely. Thus ends the tale of Borin the Black-hearted and the shadow that fell upon the lonely mountain. Yet as all endings are but beginnings in disguise, so too would this tale prove to be but the first movement in a greater symphony, whose final notes would ring out across Middle-earth in triumph over all the powers of darkness. The end.